Hello everyone, myself Ishatpreet, working as Science Mistress at Government Girls Senior Secondary Smart School, Sultanwind, Amritsar. Today we will talk about the wonderful relationship between science and poetry. Don't you think science is a poetry and poetry is a science in itself? We will discuss the amalgamation of scientific attitude and literary abilities of students to develop scientific interest in them today. So, let's start. Science and poetry are not different. Michael Faraday, in his lecture notes of 1858, said, "I am no poet, but if you think for yourself, as I proceed, the facts will form a poem in your minds." Today, I will introduce you to 6 poems to get you to science class this year. Let's enter the amazing world of scientific poetry or poetical science. What should we call it? Think yourself. The first poem is Winter Trees by William Carlos Williams. Deciduous trees, attiring and disattiring, are the main characters in this short poem. Just why do these wise trees shed their leaves in the autumn? The poem contains at least a hint of a scientific answer and a lovely basis for further discussion with your students. Let's read the poem. Winter Trees by William Carlos Williams. All the complicated details of the attiring and disattiring are completed. A liquid moon moves gently among the long branches, thus having prepared their buds against a sure winter. The wise trees stand sleeping in the cold. The next poem is When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman, one of my favorites. In this classic poem, the speaker hears a scientist lecturing, presenting proofs, charts, and diagrams about the stars. Soon the poet grows weary and ventures outside to look up in perfect silence at the star. The poem, while valuing scientific knowledge, speaks to the value of direct experience, both in science and in life. Let's read the poem. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and the diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. The third poem is Poker Star by Richard Brautigan. Everyone learns about the constellations in school, but who first named them? See, these poems are for those kids who are not interested in science, not interested in poems only. These poems are for the students to keep them interested in the science class. We should create their interest in the science class so they can learn, they can develop questions. If a student is interested in poetry, he should not feel bored in the science class. And if a student is interested in science, he should not feel bored in the literature class. As teachers, this is what we want to achieve. Yes? In this whimsical poem, Brautigan makes up his own story about a constellation, imagining a poker game among shepherds. Students may want to invent their own constellation myths as well. Let's read the poem. It's a star that looks like a poker game above the mountains of eastern Oregon. There are 3 men playing. They are all shepherds. One of them has 2 pairs, the others have nothing. The next poem is Who Has Seen the Wind by Christina Rossetti. I am sure all of you have read this poem somewhere in your childhood. No one has seen the wind, the poet says, but we all know it's there. This is a perfect introduction to the ways in which scientists explore the unknown, the seen and the unseen, from wind to atoms and viruses. It also speaks to the different varieties of scientific and sense-related experience. How do we know the wind exists? What about unseen stars or insects? Any more questions? Let's read the poem. Who has seen the wind? Neither I nor you. But when the leaves hang trembling, the wind is passing through. Who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I. But when the trees bow down their heads, the wind is passing by. The next poem is a very, very classic poem and very dear to me. To the Chief Musician upon Nebula, a Tyndalic Ode by John Clerk Maxwell. Maxwell? Isn't he a scientist? No, he's a poet as well. Maxwell enjoyed reading and citing poetry, and many of his poems survive in a collection published by his lifelong friend Lewis Campbell in 1882. This poem, To the Chief Musician upon Nebula, a Tyndalic Ode, describes the magic and allure of physical phenomena. Maxwell composed it for his friend and fellow physicist Peter Guthrie Tait, and first published it anonymously in Nature in 1871 during the final decade of Maxwell's life. A brief word about the title. Peter Tait was the first person to fully discuss the properties of the mathematical symbol nebula because of its resemblance to a harp. Thus Tait was the chief musician upon nebula, but the title of the poem is often shortened to simply a Tyndalic Ode, a reference to fellow physicist John Tyndall, who had a propensity for a effusive and passionate lecturing style. Tyndall and Maxwell did not always see eye to eye in physics or philosophy, and the style of this poem could be seen as slightly mocking parody of Tyndall. There are 8 stanzas in this poem, which you can read easily online, Google, or from a book. I have covered here 4 stanzas. You can read the full poem whenever you like, but I read first 4. I come from fields of fractured ice, whose wounds are cured by squeezing, melting they cool but in a trice, get warm again by freezing. Here in the frosty air the sprays, with fern like hoar frost bristle, there liquid stars the watery rays. Shoot through the solid crystal, I come from empyrean fires, from microscopic spaces where molecules with fierce desires shiver in hot embraces, the atoms clash, the spectra flash, projected on the screen the double D magnesium B and the thallium's living green. We place our eye where these dark rays unite in this dark focus. Right on the source of power we gaze, without a screen to cloak us. Then where the eye was placed at first, we place a disc of platinum. It glows, it puckers, will it burst? However shall we flatten him? This crystal tube, the electric ray, shows optically green, no dust or haze within. But stay, all has not yet been seen. But gleams are these of heavenly blue. What air-drawn form appearing, what mystic fish that goes like through the empty space is staring. Sorts and lots of scientific facts in these 4 stanzas of poem. The next poem is an untitled poem by the great Richard Feynman. In his legendary physics lectures from the early 1960s, Feynman argues that astronomy gave rise to physics by beckoning the human mind to contemplate the beautiful simplicity of celestial motions. But the most remarkable discovery in all of astronomy, he writes, is that the stars are made of atoms of the same kind as those of Earth. This discovery, though, we owe chiefly to Cecilia Payne. In a famous footnote to lectures quoted in richer context in Jamie Glick's indispensable biography, Genius, the Life and Science of Richard Feynman, Feynman rests from this one simple, profound fact, a beautiful meditation on the role of poetic in science. Perhaps with an eye to a Whitman's poem, when I heard the learned astronomer Feynman refutes the notion that scientific inquiry into a physical reality breeds lives of the poetic. To the contrary, any poetry that fails to convey the inherent beauty and enchantment of scientific understanding, he suggests, is the result of an improvised poetic imagination. Let's read the poem. Out of the cradle, onto dry land, here it is standing, atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity, stands at the sea, wonders at wondering. I, a universe of atoms, an atom in the universe. Such a great poem. Last but not the least, I thank you all for watching this presentation. I, as a science teacher, firmly believe that science is a subject not to be taught only with blackboard, only with pen, only with pencil, or only with laboratory equipment. A child is a master of his own future and his own deeds. We should provide everything he requires to get through life easily and promptly. If he is interested in science, we should provide him with literary aspects also, because these are all the necessities of life to survive. If he is interested in literature, as a science teacher, it is my duty to make science interesting to him. How? I have shown you a little way. You can find your own. Thanks a lot for watching.